Okay, so I'm on this refined paint layer. I can see any time where I need to spin more focus, and that's by just taking off the base painting. I can see what's missing. Right? But I want to, you don't always have the luxury of time, and I certainly don't have the luxury of time here. But I want to show all the finishing techniques in at least one part of my digital painting, right? And so what are the things that are required? Well, you need to work from photo reference, which I have here. And you need to have a base paint layer where you're kind of filling in your full shapes with background color. And then you need a separate layer that has a more refined brush, like I'm doing now, where you're playing with tip dynamics and using the tablet. It's absolutely a requirement to have a tablet for digital painting so you can go thick to thin, not just rely on a trackpad or a mouse. And you want to try to bring it up to a level of finish in some part. And the easiest part, if you're doing an animal like I am, is usually in the face, around the eye. Like, what's the level of finish that you're going to be happy with? I can define this beak and get the shadow inside the beak. But I get to decide the level of finish. It doesn't need to be super detailed to be effective. And that's where my kind of inspirations help show me the way too. This kind of level is what I'm going for. It's a little bit more energy. And I'm trying to fight against kind of the digital nature of things by making this look more like splattered acrylic paint. All right. So if that head's kind of the finish I want, then I want to bring everything else up to that as I have time. And it's not realistic for me. It's not practical or actually useful for me as the digital instructor to expect everyone to have enough time to finish off a digital painting by tonight's deadline. So what I'm asking to get full credit for this is that you demonstrate all the aspects of that technique, right? That you have each of those layers. That you have photo reference, that you have a base paint layer. You can have a sketch layer if you like, and then you have a refined paint layer. And all of that's going to really help. Even if some aspects are more finished than others. Because then you'll know how to use digital painting for your final project, should you want to invest more time and energy into it. Some of you will really like it, some of you will never want to do it again. Just like any new art practice. So now that I've got some areas kind of to the level of finish I want, the real problem is bringing everything else up so it doesn't distract. And especially with this long tail, that gives this bird kind of the nickname feathered serpent. I might actually want to delete a little bit from my base painting, so I don't have to fill all that in. And I think, like I showed last class, instead of using your eraser or painting the background color Instead, I think it helps just to use your lasso and just cut away some of these. Now, getting rid of it completely, you can see how dead that looks compared to the areas where I still have it. And so then I can paint back onto my base painting layer. So this is something you can't do in traditional painting. I can paint at 100% opacity, and I can paint behind my paint. Right? So I just unlock my base paint layer, and I can paint this green kind of behind it. Very different than digital coloring, because I'm not painting behind line art, I'm painting behind other colored strokes. But as you're refining, you can build it up in multiple ways. And if you ever feel like your base painting is restrictive, you're not limited to that. You can cut away from it. You can paint underneath your refined paint to give you closer to what you want. It's a good time to get rid of these things at the edges that I don't want, no matter what layer they're from. All right, now I just need to treat some of these areas in the wing, get that to look a little bit more finished off with just some more refined painting at around 60% opacity, pressure sensitive, not being afraid of color. With my customized brush. A lot of just kind of light scratching with the tablet to get those thin lines. You want to just get kind of lost into it. Open mouth breathing, drooling. So focused on just the energy of your movements. Just a slack-jawed slave to digital art. All right, trying to race to finish all these edges. See how this one looks. Looks a little better. Get some more variation up here. Okay, now I've kind of finished the direct painting, or very close. And that's when it becomes fun again, because all the refined painting is just spending a lot of time trying to build up a paint surface. And you want it to be a paint surface that's pretty satisfying even when you zoom in. Right? If you zoom in too much, it's just going to be boring pixels. But you zoom into about like 200, 300%, at least 200% to what you can see with the naked eye when it's printed. And you want to be interested in some of the shapes and the colors and the movement that's happening, just like when you go up close to a painting. You don't want to be let down by how basic it all looks. And that just requires time and building up of your refined paint layer. That's the difference between kind of concept paintings and like finished digital paintings. Concept paintings won't look good at full resolution. They look good from a distance because they just test quick ideas. But it takes time to build up a paint surface. And then there are ways to play with that paint surface once you're ready. So I've got this reference now. It's a little muddy in here, so I'm going to use my photo reference to kind of define some of these shadows. And then ways I can kind of mess with it now that I've got this surface. I can lock my refined paint layer, make a new layer on top, save it, Command S. And now I'm just going to paint with big, dark, opaque shapes, 100% opaque, big brush. Still going to keep it my custom brush. But you see that dark shadow that's here? I'm going to paint that in. Maybe not quite so big, like that. And the dark shadow at the wings, I'm going to paint that in. This is on a new layer. Try to get those interesting shapes. The dark shadow here, I'll paint that in. Because often when we're doing refined painting, we start to ignore the light logic. Because we're so focused on texture. But because this is on a new layer, and I'm just doing these swaths of this one dark color, now what I can do is I can set the blending mode to pin light, or to soft light. Soft light's better, right? And that's going to help sink it into the colors I have underneath. I can then play with opacity and decide how much of that I need. Maybe like that. And then, if I want to erase it, I can do that with my small brush. Just going to scribble where some of these shadows are. And you see that will make your texture even just a little bit more interesting. Especially if you make it directional. So that's one trick. And then there are just tons of variations on that. So soft light versus hard mix, right? Versus exclusion. They're all going to do very different things to your painting. Because you have all that texture underneath. And you get to decide what's the most interesting. Yeah, actually, exclusion's kind of interesting. All right, so now I'm going to get rid of the palette images because we just want a blank background. When I turn off my base painting, it should look like a pretty interesting painting just on its own. It kind of looks like a pastel drawing. That's just my refined paint. And then this is another finishing technique I like to play with, which you can only do with digital. going to lock my refine paint layer.